Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné, our top story. This is our special edition of Eye on Africa on Sudan. Today marks 2 years since war broke out between the armed forces and the RSF, triggering one of the world's worst humanitarian crises and displacing millions. They were once allies, they are now foes. In 2019, the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces worked together to oust former ruler Omar al-Bashir from power. But after the transition to civilian rule failed, the Sudanese army chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, collaborated again in 2021 to topple the government. Sudanese were expecting there would be a peaceful return to civilian rule. Then came April 2023, and what would be 2 years of civil war. Elisa Herbert and Antonia Kerrigan tell the story.
The 15th of April 2023, black smoke rises over Khartoum. After weeks of tension, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, led by Mohamed Daglo, launched a series of attacks against General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan's army, who promised, a week later, a swift victory for his troops.
We are confident that we will overcome this crisis, preserve the country's security and unity, and transition back to civilian rule.
Instead, it is the start of a long and violent civil war. As the weeks go by, the RSF prove an unexpectedly tough opponent, allegedly supported by arms deliveries from several foreign countries, including the United Arab Emirates. The paramilitary group secure multiple ground victories, besiege pockets of Khartoum, and conquer much of Darfur and the Kordofan region. Meanwhile, despite international mediation efforts and calls for ceasefires, negotiations are at a standstill, and every time a truce agreement is signed, it is immediately violated. In June of 2024, the International Criminal Court warns of alleged war crimes.
Of attacks against the civilian population, in particular, attacks directed against camps for internally displaced persons.
And the United Nations say the population are at high risk of famine.
This is an entirely man-made crisis and a shameful stain on our collective conscience. We need rapid, safe, unimpeded humanitarian access.
By late 2024, the Sudanese army are regaining ground, having embarked on a multi-front counter-offensive. Then comes a major victory. In March 2025, they reclaim Khartoum's presidential palace and airport, and al-Burhan declares the capital free. The Sudanese army now control most of the north and east, and the country has become increasingly fractured. Civilians now face the world's worst humanitarian crisis. According to some estimates, more than 150,000 people have died. More than 13 million people have fled their homes, and food, shelter, water and medical supplies are scarce. UN Women have seen a 288% increase in demand for life-saving support following rape and sexual violence, and an end to the fighting is nowhere in sight.
And since the beginning of the war, many diplomatic efforts have taken place. This Tuesday, diplomats and aid officials from around the world met in London for a conference. The African Union, which co-hosted the one-day event with Britain, France, Germany, and the European Union, called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. But UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy acknowledged that achieving peace would take time, renewed international effort, and patient diplomacy. So the question remains, is there a path out of this conflict? To help us understand where things stand and what's at stake, we're joined by Jihad Mashamoun, a Sudanese researcher and political analyst. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Mashamoun. So first, how would you describe the current status of the war? Last month, we saw the Sudanese military regain control over Khartoum. Can we talk about the reversal of balance of strength, or is it just a symbolic victory?
Thank you for having me. Absolutely. It's a reverse of balance of power on the ground, because now the army has gained the initiative. The army and its allied forces of the Joint Armed Movement, who are allied to the army, they have gained the upper hand in the battlefield now. with recapturing the capital and now clearing Omdurman, because the capital is made of 3 cities. It's made of Khartoum, North Khartoum, and Omdurman. So now Omdurman is being cleared out, and in the same process, we have al-Ubaid city in Kordofan region. It had the siege on it has been broken through by the army, and now it's expanding into Kordofan, further into Kordofan region. And from there, they're going to expand into Darfur, to Al-Fash and other cities. So basically, there is the initiative now, the army has an initiative on its hand, and this has been changing the political dynamics on the ground. If you remember, in February, the Rapid Support Forces of Lieutenant General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo and his focal allies, they formed a movement called Ta'sis in Kenya, where they wanted to create, they claimed that they're going to create a parallel government, excuse me. But this whole process of claiming to form a parallel government, it shows that it's not going to happen because the army is now getting the initiative on the ground. So it's not. The question is, where is this parallel government going to be formed, and what is it supposed to do to begin with, that the Rapid Support Force hasn't been doing of dividing the country? But at the end of the day, that's why many in this from the Sudanese de facto Sudanese authority, al-Burhan and his allies, they see the parallel movement or government is just a pressure card for the Rapid Support Forces to be included in the new transition period.
So meanwhile,
now,
discussions.
Also,
sorry to interrupt, but meanwhile, discussions continue. For example, the summit in London included officials from Western nations, neighboring countries, but there was no one from Sudan. So how is it going to affect the path towards peace?
Absolutely, that was a question that concerned many. Is the London conference had the risk of being perceived as the Berlin conference of the 1800s, basically, of dividing dividing Africa. So basically, with lack of representation of Sudan in this conference, it puts the question: is what is being solved here, and is it just another pledge of donating money rather than solving the root of the problem? And the root of the problem is there are countries involved in this conflict. Basically, each side has supporting countries that is prolonging this conflict through providing arms, through providing funding, through providing the diplomatic and political cover. So again, the London conference, it missed the opportunity of bringing the de facto government, Emirates, and other groups together to have a close discussion with one another on how to end this conflict. But there is another argument, if I may add to this, is that basically that every time there's a conference being held, one side doesn't want to attend to the conference. It's either the de facto government of Burhan and his allies, or the Rapid Support Forces, or even to begin with, nothing, when an agreement is reached between both sides, they don't implement it like they did the declaration. Until now, it has not been implemented because each side is violating it.
So what do you think we need to shift politically, regionally, or internationally for peace efforts to gain real traction?
What I believe is possible is that the international community and regional actors, they need to take a serious, sustained, and workable long-term approach into resolving Sudan's crisis. First, you need to have a meeting with all actors, that's the beginning, and to pressure them to those meetings. Even though Burhan and his allies and Hameti and his allies don't want to be in that meeting, they can use the tools that they're using now, such as sanctioning them, and also they need to sanction their sources of income, which they've been doing, but also pressure their allies on each side to pressure both sides to come and sit down on the table. Further to that is to encourage and to pressure those allies not to stop supporting those both sides. You have reports stating that Emirates has been allowing funding of the Rapid Support Forces to continue, such as through getting Colombian mercenaries, that's from one side, through Emirates, and then you have Egypt involved and supporting the Sudanese armed forces with its airplane. That's some reports. But then the other question that needs to be pointed is how is this, what's going to happen after the ending of this conflict?
We're going to get back to that point a little bit later. But meanwhile, let's talk about also the humanitarian impacts of the conflict. As Sudan enters its third year of war, there is no sign of, obviously, of respite for civilians. Tens of thousands of people have been killed and more than 13 million uprooted, with reports of rape being used as a weapon of war across the country. The United Nations also says it's the world's largest hunger and displacement crisis, and the impact of the war spreads beyond Sudan's borders. Let's have a report with Olivia Bizot.
When the Sudanese army took over Khartoum just a few weeks ago, many had hoped this would mean the conflict would begin winding down and that the armed forces would use this victory as a leverage in potential peace talks. But instead, the conflict has only escalated, with the focus now shifting west to Darfur, which is largely controlled by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The instability in Sudan is now spilling over into neighbouring countries, which is complicating humanitarian efforts.
The most difficult thing to deal with is just the volatility, not only within Sudan, but also within the region. So, for example, I mean, if anything happens in Chad, we have a pipeline that goes through the west that could be affected. Now, with the iteration of the situation in southern Sudan, you know, sometimes we were able before to be able to rely on the support of our teams in South Sudan. This is becoming more complicated. So it really needs quite an important operational agility to be able to deal with all the problems which are coming in every day.
As this conflict enters its third year, peace is unfortunately still looking very far away. Both sides have vowed to continue the fight until they obtain total victory, but those who are paying the highest price for this continued fighting are civilians. This is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Tens of thousands of people have been killed and more than 13 million people displaced. Now, some people are starting to return home. Last month, our team was in Khartoum, where they met some of these families. They were there just before Khartoum was recaptured by the army. But the families they met there came home only to find their homes completely destroyed and their neighbourhoods unrecognisable.
And meanwhile, Sudan's education system has collapsed, with facilities destroyed, children and teachers displaced, and schools turned to shelters. Since the outbreaks of the conflict 2 years ago, more than 17 million children are out of school. Our team, Bastien Renouille and Mohamed Farhat, went to one of the few schools that managed to reopen in the city of al-Burhan in the state of Khartoum.
Only a few students have returned to this school in Omdurman, Khartoum's twin city. Many fled, and some are still missing. But for those who do come back, skipping any more classes is just not an option.
I want to be a doctor. That's why, despite the war, despite the fighting, despite the bombings, I came back to school.
Many teachers haven't returned, and some schools are in ruins.
We're working as volunteers. The conflict has dragged on for nearly 2 years, and we've only been paid 3 times. But I keep teaching for the children, for Sudan's future. When I step into the classroom, I know this is where I'm meant to be.
This school is in an army-controlled area. But that doesn't mean it's safe.
The RSF may have gone, but the bombing hasn't stopped. People call it random shelling, but I don't believe that. They want to spread fear, kill civilians, and drive residents out of the city.
Lessons finish by noon, and in the afternoons, the classrooms turn into shelters for displaced families.
Let's bring back Dr. Mashamoun. Dr. Mashamoun, what's your thought on future generations?
Thank you very much. I mean, this conflict really has debilitated any opportunity for education in Sudan to restart. I mean, if we look at what's happening now, even though the rapid support forces have been defeated in central Sudan, they're still attacking places using drones and strikes, creating a sense of fear. And that sense of fear doesn't provide an opportunity for education to begin with to thrive in Sudan at this war. Let me remind the audience, as presented by your show, that basically a lot of the educational centers are now used as refugee accommodations, basically for families to settle in until this conflict is resolved. But unfortunately, the conflict does not seem to end at sight, with both sides still continuing the path of war.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mashamoun. And this concludes our special edition of Eye on Africa on Sudan. Thank you for watching.